Look, thank you everybody for joining us. Other people may drop in as we go along. Great. If you need to shoot off for anything, that's fine too. But thank you for your time this afternoon and for taking the time to listen to a couple of case studies that we have for you. My name's Mark Greenwood. I'm a Director of People Solutions and a registered psychologist. My colleague here is Georgia Nedkoff. Georgia's a consultant with the business and a registered psychologist too. What we're going to do today is talk you through a bit of a slide deck of information, but also we're going to actually talk through some specific case studies. The purpose of this webinar is actually to try and inform you about some processes that we use that you can use as well. So it's to give you some ideas and hopefully give you some different thinking in terms of ways to approach diagnosing culture and different issues within the business. As Georgia mentioned, if there's questions as you go along, fire them off to us in the chat box and we'll make sure we answer them at the end. Anything from you, Georgia?
No, that's all good. I'm just going to start sharing our slide deck. Hopefully it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. We will spend most of the time talking about the case studies there as well. So I'm just going to share that with you all now.
Okay, just a quick introduction to People Solutions. For those of you who don't know us, as a business, we've been around for over 20 years in Perth. Perth's our primary office, of course. We're an organisational site consultancy, and a lot of the work we do is in Western Australia, but of course, these days with internet and the sort of work that we do work for national and global customers. We do work for the large corporates in oil and gas, mining, and other areas, right down to non-for-profits. And you'll see from the diversity of case studies that we talk about today, some of that range of different industries that we work in. We do work psychometric testing, assessment development centres, career transition outplacement services, but we also do organisational development work. Where the focus is really on looking at individuals, teams and organisations and coming up with the right sort of diagnostics for them. Our purpose, helping people succeed, whether that's individuals, teams or organisations, that's very much the focus of what we do. I knew I'd get that wrong. Thank you. This session we're going to talk about how you assess culture, engagement and wellbeing in these case studies. The case studies that we're using, they're not so big, large that you'd look at them and think, well, I just can't do that myself. In fact, a lot of what we're going to talk about is stuff that you can apply within your own organisation. We're looking very much at 3 different case studies, one that looks at a culture, another one that is about engagement, and then the other one which is looking about, well, more of a wellbeing overview for an organisation. So the first that George is going to talk us through is with a mining company, a mid-tier mining company. They were interested in having a look at wellbeing across their operational workforce and came to us saying, well, how can we communicate to our workforce that this is something that's been talked about, but then also what can we actually start doing about that? The second one is an oil and gas company where they wanted to have a look at the culture of their business and the way they brought 2 businesses together. And the third is in a disabilities non-for-profit area where they wanted to very much having a look at the engagement of the people within the business, what brought people to their business and kept them there. So we're going to keep the information very focused on these case studies and, as I say, how you can apply these sorts of processes potentially within your organisation where you feel it's appropriate. Right.
Okay, so just before we jump into the case studies, I'm not going to spend too much time talking through this sort of back-end process or setting up the scene. You know, a lot of you on the webinar are OD or HR professionals, so it's quite likely that you have a really good understanding of diagnostics anyway. But in terms of People Solutions approach, to, you know, overly simplify it, it's sort of a 3-step approach when it comes to rolling out diagnostics within the business. The first step is in relation to understanding why. So why it is that you're, looking to assess certain areas. There could be something coming up in terms of some new research that's available for yourself within the business. There could be change going about within your organisation. Potentially there were some interventions that were put forward and you'd like a bit more understanding around that. Or, maybe things are just going pretty well and you sort of want to understand what are the things that are working well and how can you look at retaining that or keeping that going as well. So that's really brief, is really just about clarifying the why. So you understand, why we're doing this process, and that can be clearly communicated to the employees as well. And that will also help you work out what it is that you're actually going to be looking for and who it is that you need to talk to in relation to this. So this brings us on to our second step, which is about understanding what it is that you're going to be assessing, looking for, diagnosing, and who it is that you're going to be talking to in this process as well. Now, depending on that will depend on the process that you take, whether it's customised diagnostics and off-the-shelf diagnostics, and whether your approach is going to be a survey, a focus group, or an interview as well. So all the case studies that we are talking through during the session today, these are customised solutions. What People Solutions do is we provide bespoke diagnostics. There may be situations where it could be more beneficial to put forward an off-the-shelf option, and this would be in the case of, dealing with very large numbers and sort of just assessing where things are at initially as well. The case studies that we talk to today, we will go through each of these different survey options in terms of surveys, focus groups and interviews. So you have a really good understanding in terms of what those different areas look like, and in your situation, which one may be most beneficial for yourselves as well. It is important, with each different option you choose, they're obviously all going to have their pros, cons as well. So it's important that you really define that why quite clearly, as this will help in terms of deciding what's the best approach for this too. The last step is to provide feedback. So, once you've rolled out the diagnostics, it's really important that you do feedback that information to your employees as well. The amount of times Mark and I have gone in to meet with organisations and the employees have thought, oh, here's another couple of consultants that are just going to come in, talk to us and then leave again, without finding out what the outcomes of that are. It's really common. So it is very important that you do feedback that information that's been gained from the diagnostic, what it is that you found out, any recommendations based on that within, reason that's going to be effective for your company to put forward, and any timelines around those recommendations as well. Aligning it to the organisational goals are great because that really helps to highlight to the employees how their role and how their feedback ties in with the broader organisational picture as well. Reassessing is really great in terms of it gives you that benchmark when you initially do the diagnostic assessment, and then reassessing, a year to a couple of years down the track can be really helpful in terms of understanding how those interventions have gone and how those changes have been made as well. So that's really brief in terms of, defining why you're running out the diagnostics, what it is that you're looking for, what's going to be the best approach to that, who you're going to ask, and ensuring that you're feeding back that information in a timely fashion as well. So we're going to spend more time going through the case studies as this will help highlight that three-step approach a little bit more. And, Mark and myself have been to lots of webinars before, and we find talking to the case studies probably the best way to learn information and to take on board any information that's provided as well. So our first case study is with, like Mark mentioned, a mid-tier mining company. So they approached us on the back of some new research. So there was research that was commissioned by the Mental Health Commission around the mental health and wellbeing of FIFO employees. So on the back of this organisation requested Mark and myself to come in and present that information to employees, but they also wanted to understand, based on that report and the findings that came out of it, where their employees sit in relation to that and what are their perceptions in relation to FIFO areas that may impact mental health. So these are things, a lot of us understand FIFO can impact mental health. So that's things like swings, rosters, camp facilities, connections with their team, and also connections with others as well. So we looked at sort of a wide range of factors in relation to that. So our goal for this project was to develop timely and effective targets and recommendations for this company for actions around the wellbeing of their FIFO employees as well. So how we went about this, Mark and I actually got the privilege of flying out to site. So this was pre-COVID days. And what we did was we presented the findings to employees prior to rolling out the Wellbeing Diagnostics. By having this initial communication at the start with the employees at their pre-start meetings, this helped kind of prepare them and set them up that, Mark and I will be walking around on site, that will be, putting forward surveys or running focus groups, and really so that they could start thinking about their own well-being or areas of their own FIFO lifestyle that may impact this or may be quite positive as well. So in terms of the approach we took for this, because it was a mid-tier organisation, so relatively large, what we did was roll out a site-wide survey. So, we had a pretty good response rate on this. So all employees, including leadership, participated in the surveys. And then we also ran some cross-sectional focus groups as well. With these focus groups, it was very important for us to keep the leadership or management team separate to any sort of operational staff as well. That way we find that the operational team feel more comfortable speaking about areas of improvement without feeling like, they may be punished for speaking up as well. Not that they would be, but it does create that atmosphere of psychological safety as well. So the reason we went for the surveys and the focus groups was we found the surveys were really beneficial at looking at wellbeing from an individual perspective. So for these surveys, we looked at things like employee satisfaction in their roles. The survey also included the Depression, Anxiety, Stress Scale, or DASS, which can help to look at certain areas where wellbeing may be impacted due to FIFO lifestyle as well. So the surveys very much gave us that quantitative information that we were able to feed back to the employer. Then the focus groups were a nice add-on to that information, as these allowed us to delve a little bit deeper into areas that were identified within the survey as well. Now, the focus groups, they were semi-structured. So we would start off with some open-ended questions and ensure these questions tapped into those areas that were identified around FIFO wellbeing, such as camp facilities, connections with others, swing and roster as well. These focus groups really just allowed people to have a chance to communicate, talk, share their ideas and perspectives as well. And because Mark and I were there facilitating them, we were able to bring in people that may be a bit more quiet and really relay that information in a way that people could understand, and so that they felt comfortable putting forward their ideas as well. So our process was, first we communicated the outcomes of the FIFO mental health and wellbeing report. We advised our role and why we'd be there. We also got to experience the work environment by going out onto site as well and seeing things firsthand in terms of the camp facilities. And then we had that survey and focus group combination as well. So in terms of the outcomes from this, here's just some brief snapshots from the report that we provided. But essentially what we did was we used findings and the quantitative information from the surveys. We'd present that, in tables or graphs. And then that focus group information, so that qualitative data, we're able to pull out themes from that and make connections with what was found within the survey summaries. So for example, within the surveys, looking at that DASS scale or depression, anxiety, stress, The area around feeling tired and having fatigue was the lowest area that was found for these FIFO employees. So based on that and based on our discussions from the focus group, it was found that transitioning from day to night shifts, employees tended to find these as more effective than the transition from the night to day shifts as well. So we're able to provide some recommendations based on that as well. When feeding back information, most companies and most people tend to focus on the negatives. We all have that negative confirmation bias. So it is really important that you still include that positive information within there. For the most part, 85% of these FIFO employees were moderately to very satisfied with their role. A lot of them did communicate that they really enjoyed the organisation, they appreciated working there, but hey, here's some suggestions on ways in which things can be done more effectively as well. So when providing, those statistics, that quantitative and qualitative information, it's also important that you put forward some outcomes as well based on that data. So the data is all well and good, but what can we actually do with it? What are some suggestions on things that could be put forward as well? With recommendations, not all of them can be implemented. That's where it's important, to have a discussion with the company in terms of what's reasonable, and having a look at that research out there as well in terms of what is best practice in relation to this. So for example, for this group, research did suggest that even time or shorter rosters are more effective for wellbeing. So that's what the research suggests. However, there are business and personal costs based on this. So a lot of employees, they wanted those shorter rosters or those even time rosters, but they didn't consider that that would then impact their remuneration as well. So there are things to consider when putting forward recommendations as well. Along with these sort of recommendations that require a bit more longer term thinking and longer term planning, quick wins are always fun, and they're always things that organisations can implement straight away. So when reporting these findings, we do find the quick wins really helpful for businesses. For example, this one is just about preparing and educating workers to manage the day to night transitions. So any information that can be provided to them a little bit more can help in terms of reducing that fatigue as well.
Great, thank you, Georgia. I'll talk you through case study number 2. This is a project we run. In fact, we've done a couple of surveys with this company, one a year or so ago, 2 years ago almost, and another more recently, just as a bit of a follow-up. The organisation came to us and said, well, look, we want to do an organisational health check. And we said, well, what is that exactly? Because a health check can mean anything from physical to wellbeing and many other things. So what they wanted to do was to get a snapshot of the organisational culture in a sense. Now, what this organisation, they had amalgamated or they'd acquired recently an operational business. So they had gone from a non-operational investment house to having an operating facility within their organisation. In that, they have 2 very different cultures. So they've got cultures that are, in some respects, just totally at odds with each other. And what I mean by that is one's very much focused on the investment side of their business. The other is producing operational results. So the first thing we did, we want to clarify, so what do you really want to get from this organisational health check? So what they wanted to understand was what was their current operating culture, what was working and what wasn't working, and how would that potentially change since the amalgamation of the 2 businesses. The organisational health check was to have a look at that operating culture as it currently exists. So what was working and how it might build on that into the future. So the information they can get now, they thought, well, we can use this to bring together a more cohesive culture that works despite the amalgamation of these 2 businesses. The diagnostics, it was quite important when we discussed with the organisation, the executive in the business, they said, well, we want everybody in the organisation to have a voice. Now, as Georgia mentioned before, if you're talking an organisation with thousands of people, doing one-on-one interviews isn't going to be pragmatic, not unless you want to pay a consulting team a a lot of money and a lot of time to do that for you. So they said, no, we have a business which is of a size where we can get you to do one-on-one interviews, because we want everybody to feel like they've been heard, so that they have an ability to put forward their ideas and their opinions. That's what they wanted by way of the organisational health check. And they wanted everybody in the business to participate. They didn't mandate it, but they did say, we'd like everybody to be involved. So we said, yep, great, we can do that for you. We put together a structured interview. So when you're going into these sorts of situations, you do want to have an understanding of what are the sort of factors that we're going to be trying to measure here. Really important, we said, okay, first of all, we need to be clear with the executive team as to what we're trying to achieve here, but also we need to talk to everybody in the business and communicate what this is about. So we got them to organise a town hall meeting where everybody came along. They put on a light lunch and said, well, here's some people, we're going to do this project. They'll explain to you who they are and how this is going to work. So we introduced ourselves and we provided information on, well, this is what's in scope. This is what this organisational health check is going to do, what we're going to be asking about, what we're going to be talking about. We made it really clear about what's confidential. Confidentiality is really important to get people to speak clearly and honestly about how they feel. So we communicated those messages. We said, look, here's our business cards. If you want to contact us independent of the business, just to discuss more about what we're doing, happy to do that. So we wanted to create an environment where everybody could share their perspectives. We made sure that people understand what's in scope and what's out of scope. And as Georgia mentioned before with the mining company, I mean, if you go and talk to people and say, well, hey, tell us what your problems are, everyone's going to think about, well, what don't I like? What should I talk about? So they're going to always give you feedback. But you've got to make it clear, well, if one person says, well, I don't think I'm remunerated fairly, that doesn't add up to an organisational cultural problem. That's one person. So it's clear, important to say, well, look, we're not here to advocate for you to get more money. We're here to get a snapshot of the organisation. So it's important, both with the organisation and with the people that you're talking to make sure they understand what is in and what is out of scope when you embark on these sorts of projects. Thanks, Georgia. Now, there's a bit of detail here. It's probably a little hard to read for you, but just to summarise it, when we did this overview in 2019, some of the things that we found, and this is purely by having these structured interviews, as I say, first of all, the organisational culture and vision. Almost 60% of the employees didn't actually know the future of the business. What they meant was, although the business had been brought together successfully in terms of co-location, there wasn't a broader vision painted for them as to, well, where are we going? Are we going to grow the organisation? Are we going to be pursuing new projects? Are we going to be pursuing alternative energy sources or whatever else? So a lot of people in the business had this feeling, we don't really know where it's all headed. It's a problem. The org structure, a lot of people, almost half, or a bit over half, in fact, said that there's a need, the business is siloed. We need the opportunity to have better communications across the business. We're not working, finance isn't working with operations, administration isn't supporting these other areas as effectively. So there was a disconnect in that sense. So they wanted to get out of the silos and work together more cohesively. 57% wanted their leaders to communicate more openly. They had a feeling that, well, our leaders potentially know where we're going, but we don't. In relation to things like performance, in relation to how different parts of the business are working with each other, there wasn't clarity. And 60% said, well, the current processes and systems hampered their ability to work effectively. And that was two businesses bringing together two sets of processes and systems. So we made some recommendations on that. I mean, and a really simple recommendation was like, we suggested the CEO, the exec team should start implementing a town hall process. And what we mean by that is bringing employees together and saying, well, this is the vision of the business, trying to create some clarity for people so that they understand, well, where is the business going? talking about the org structure. How can we change the org structure so there is more communication, implementing communications processes internally, but also even things like implementing social activities so that people get to know other people in the business and then communicate more freely. So simplistic recommendations. When we did this, we repeated the process for the business in 2021. The improvements in morale and team spirit had improved significantly. A majority of the people now knew the future direction of the business. They, like all of us, had gone through the whole COVID lockdown process, and they said, look, that had been really well managed by the leaders. 87% knew the standards required of their team. 86% said their manager encouraged them to give them ideas for improvement. So we'd seen a significant improvement in terms of the way the business was working, and that people understood each other more, they were clear on the vision, there was greater clarity. The organisational direction, well, there had been a project that the business was now focused on pursuing. Of course, a common project brings people together, but people knew a little bit more about, okay, where are we going in terms of certainly this project, but there was still some desire to understand, well, what's the longer term future? So there were still issues there. Trust and communication, well, some of these things like town halls, people said that had been very effective. But there were still some issues in terms of trust. Where's our leader going in terms of promises, and where's the communication? How can we continue to improve on that? But there'd definitely been some improvements. So again, an interesting way of gathering data in terms of where's the culture at within an organisation. The next case study I'm going to talk about is in the disabilities non-for-profit sector. In this particular assignment, we decided focus groups were the best way to go, rather than sort of individual interviews or an organisational wide survey. This organisation, when they contacted us initially, they said, oh, look, we've got turnover in a particular part of our business, important part of their business. And of course, their question, I guess a lot of people ask the question, well, is it the money? And we said, okay, well, let's think about it a little bit more. What do you want to get out of us trying to find out more information on this? So the company wanted actually to find out, well, what is motivating or demotivating their staff? Are people leaving because of money, or are there other reasons potentially involved here? And they wanted to focus this on the specific area that people were leaving from the business. It wasn't a let's talk to everybody. It's these particular skills, disability skills workers, they are the focus of what we want to have a look at. They're an important part of our business. So when we talked to them a little bit more, we said, okay, well, we can gather that information on what motivates and demotivates your people, but this information can be useful to you on an ongoing basis, in that it would allow them to think about how the teams work and the roles that they have, but also it can be used in attraction and retention. So if you can find out what keeps people, what attracts them, what motivates people to join the organisation, and then what keeps them here, you've got information that can add to your attraction and retention processes. This organisation, not a huge organisation in disability services, had differently at geographic locations. So we went to each of these locations and conducted a focus group with the skills workers. The part of that process was sitting down with the group of skills workers, myself and Georgia, in an open environment, in sort of the back of the warehouse type thing. We said, look, we don't want management to be present, only because we want people to be able to speak honestly. If they were all saying, well, yeah, look, we think we're really poorly paid and it's not worth staying here, we don't want them to feel pressure from management if they're speaking openly like that. We had a particular motivation survey that we developed, and this wasn't highly complex. It was just saying, well, what are some of the motivators that keep you engaged in your work? We got everybody to fill that in. That was sort of 5-minute, 10-minute process. And then we had an open discussion with them. Again, what's in scope, what's out of scope? Hey guys, we're here to gather this information. We're not telling you that everything's going to change because we're involved and we're gathering this information. but legitimately, what are we going to do? We're going to give direct feedback to the leadership saying these are the issues for you as to what keeps you here and what doesn't. So the process, communicating and translating the importance of the employee's role and played within the organisation. And the business said, we want you to tell our people, we tell them anyway, but we want you to tell them we're doing this because we do value their opinion. They are important to us as a business. The actual focus group itself, if you're running a focus group, it's very easy for people in a focus, particularly the more vocal members, to drag a conversation in a particular direction. So part of your facilitating that focus group, you have to keep people onto a bit of a track in terms of what they're talking about. And if they're deviating or departing from that, if it's important and everybody's sort of agreeing, then you can let them go down that track a bit. But you've got to try and keep, one person who might just be continually banging on about their particular gripe, is that a gripe that's consistent with everybody in the business, or is that just them, their particular issue? So yeah, for us, it was getting those open-ended questions, but keeping to a track, keeping to some focus on those motivations, what they enjoy about their work and what keeps them motivated. Really interesting in terms of the outcome. The people who worked in this disability services group, for them, they did the work because of work-life balance and flexibility. It was really important to them. They actually weren't there for the money. Very few, in fact, in all of these exercises that George and I have talked about, these case studies, money came down as very low in terms of what was a motivator for people to either stay or leave. People in this industry also had an enormous amount of satisfaction from the feeling that they're helping others. They like the work-life balance. I can go finish early, I can go to my doctor, I can go shopping, pick up the kids, whatever the case might be. But they also got a really strong sense of intrinsic satisfaction of what I do is important because I'm helping other people. They told us that the leadership in terms of their immediate management was effective, it was beneficial, it was helpful to them. The friendships and connections they made amongst their colleagues, but also with the people with disability was really important to them. A lot of them would socialise after work, they'd go to the local quiz night, these sorts of things. So those social connections in their work were really important. They explained to us that really they didn't know who the senior leadership was within the business, and effectively they didn't really understand the sort of greater, purpose of the business. They saw the purpose was to help these people gain skills. Now, the recommendations, I won't talk through all of these, but it was really interesting. The thing we noticed was there was a nexus here or a disconnect, and that is that the people in the business, the skills workers, were there because they enjoyed their work. They really liked helping people. That was a really important priority to them. A lot of them knew they could get more money in other industries, but they said, well, we're here because we want to help these people. That's really important to us. And yet the business is saying to them, well, we need you to work more quickly. We need you, we've got to finish this project because we need the money, because, the business was very focused, the leadership was very focused on the commercial aspect of what they do. So what I'm saying there is one part of the business is saying to them, well, we need the commercial outcome, and yet the individuals delivering the service are thinking, well, no, we're here for the people who need the help. So what the problem is there, that they don't understand the vision of why is the leadership pushing for this, and the leadership don't effectively understand, well, what's really motivating our people in the work they do. We spoke to them about that. First of all, the thing that we came up with from doing this is we identified these are key engagers in terms of the potentially in recruitment. So when you are looking for people in the business, work-life balance and flexibility are going to be really important. Appealing to individuals' intrinsic desire to help others is going to be important in your advertising or your attraction processes. We talked to them about the technology. We suggested, well, again, it's time for town halls. And what we mean by that is, again, your leadership coming down and saying, well, the reason we're focused on the commercial outcome is it allows us to help more people with disability. But how do we do that and allow you guys to feel like you're really providing a service? So really important messages. There are other things about communicating roster changes, which was sort of annoying to individuals. These would happen at the last minute, and making sure simple things like making sure when people were coming into the business, the recruitment, the induction process was developed more effectively. They found that a lot of people would join wanting to help others, but would be dropped into it. And within a week, they're feeling overwhelmed. Working with people with disabilities is more challenging than they thought. But if you had somebody who could mentor you, shadow you, and engage you a little bit more in how to deal with some of those challenges, they felt that the outcomes would be more effective. So that's a quick overview. As I say, focus groups, the right solution. Smaller focus groups, sort of what we had about 10 a dozen people in each one of them. And people, they put on morning and afternoon teas. That always keeps people engaged. They were about 2 hours, no more than that. But it allowed us to get some really good information and provide that feedback to the business. Lessons learnt. That's Georgia and I on a site with our high vis gear. Georgia's going to talk to a couple of points on the lessons learnt, and then I'll finish off. Over to you.
Cool. So those were our case studies. So, you know, with everything that we roll out, and as psychologists, there's always limitations to things that you do and things to be mindful of, and lessons learned from the process as well. I suppose in terms of rolling out processes like these, a lot of the time, and what Mark and I experienced meeting with these organisations, is the senior leadership or HR team tend to know already what the problems are, or what are the areas of focus. However, that doesn't mean that, you know, the reasons for those behaviours or the reasons for those complaints or things could be based on the information, you know, that you can see. There could be deeper things going on for these people as well. And that's where, you know, even though you may know that information, it can be really important and really valuable to have these confidential diagnostics, whether they're an interview, survey or focus group, as that can help you understand a little bit deeper as to the reasons behind the behaviours or the reasons behind the comments from employees as well. Getting this information, having data and having that quantitative or qualitative information can help to then guide actionable items or actionable recommendations that are pragmatic and aligned with your business goals as well. So although you may already know, you know, the issues or the reasons going on, actually rolling out diagnostics can help gain buy-in as well to any recommendations that come about, and can help provide a deeper meaning. It also helps employees feel that they are listened to, and that, you know, they can trust being open and honest in these situations as well. So employees also need to be brought on board to feel invested in the process and that it's worthwhile. So having clear communications up front and having clear communications at the end can really help employees feel that the process is worthwhile for them too. Obviously, you know, doing things like interviews or focus groups, that engagement's there, whereas surveys, you know, you may tend to find that the completion rate is a little bit lower, and that's quite common as well. Employees need to feel confident in the fact that their speaking up won't result in any negative outcomes. So this is the reason why we tend to keep management or leadership focused groups separate to that of other employees. Not to say that it will, but employees can feel a lot more confident speaking up if they feel, you know, there's no leaders listening as well. And whenever we run these things, it is very important to let employees know that their responses are confidential and that all responses are presented as an aggregate, so as a group. No individual is kind of pinpointed specifically, because as Mark mentioned before, we're looking at common themes that come about. If one employee mentions that they'd, you know, like a better coffee machine in the office, but the rest of the group hasn't, then that's information that, you know, you don't put into those reports as well. So, and then lastly, and I mentioned this before, businesses need to communicate the outcomes to employees in a time-efficient fashion. This is very important. You do need to ensure that you sort of communicate that information quickly and time efficiently, just to keep employees warm and to keep them trusting the process as well.
Cool. We'll wrap up because we're getting close to time, but just the lessons learned. Target your information. Think about what's the right process to apply. Not every process, and you can have a combination of these things, as we suggested. Tailoring them. If it's an organisational survey across 3,000 people, well, again, the degree to which you're going to tailor that to specific areas is going to be different. But if you are looking for smaller diagnostic processes within your organisation, targeted at particular areas, you can tailor them. Base your recommendations on the data from your people. With all of these assignments, we produce an A4 infographic that we give to the business and say, well, look, here's what you can release to your people, which explains the outcomes of what came from these surveys or these focus groups or whatever else. And for some businesses, there might be challenges in that, for the example, the oil and gas business, that case study, they said, yeah, we want you to communicate this back to our people. So we stood up in front of the group and said, well, look, yeah, these were the findings. 58% of you don't understand what the vision is. And the leadership said, yeah, that's something we're going to work on changing. So that sort of feedback proves to people that they've been listened to and that there's something happening. Tailor your recommendations and interventions. Not all of them have to be complex. They can be relatively simple and an easy win, as Georgia said. But understand and make sure people understand what's in scope and what isn't. Be pragmatic, make the solutions timely and the feedback timely too. As I say, that constant feedback we get is, another consultancy or another cultural survey or another survey. Nothing ever comes of these. When you can start implementing just some basic timely solutions, easy wins, then people start feeling there's some response. Communicate the findings, the timelines, and by doing all of this, you create trust in the people in the business that they're being listened to. But that's probably enough from us. We've run to 45 minutes. Thank you very much for your time and attention. We appreciate that. I hope there's been some interest. As Georgia mentioned, we are happy to share slides with you. If there's any questions, please fire away.
So we do have a question here that says, what are some factors that you consider when recommending realistic actions?
Good question. Thank you, Greg. Look, the factors in terms of, there are some things that obviously it's really important to make sure that people understand what's in scope and what's out of scope. Now, with the mining example that Georgia spoke about, the employee said, oh, look, what we'd ideally, and if you ask, I guess, a lot of people in those FIFO arrangements, we'd love to go to an even time roster. Now, a realistic action for the organisation and communicating that back and say, well, everybody wants to go to an even time roster. Is that realistic for the business? And the business were very clear. They said, well, no, it can't happen because, number one, from an operational point of view and a whole range of other reasons, I'm sure there were financial perspectives in there, that no, we can't do that. But also they said to the employees in the business that we can do that, but that if we go to that sort of roster, there will be a financial implication for you as well. So it's not just the business saying, well, we want to make more money or save money, but realistically, if we go to an even time roster, your remuneration is going to potentially decrease. Now, when people considered that, they said, okay, well, no. So in terms of thinking about those realistic actions, it's creating an understanding of what's in and out of scope, but then also communicating back to people, well, there are some things here that we can do, we can act upon immediately, like getting you to understand the vision. But there are some things in terms of what everybody's wanting here that are longer term prospects that have to be thought out at a more strategic level, and we're going to have to take time to think about and get back to you on. So I hope that answers your question there, Greg, but it is very much making sure people understand what can and can't be achieved within the scope.
Any other questions? Anyone? We'll give maybe just another minute or so. That all sounds pretty clear. Obviously, as I mentioned before, this session is being recorded. We can pop those slides up as well and send those through to you. And if any more questions do come up around that, as well. We do have another question here. So what if staff don't agree that management are coming up with realistic actions, i.e. the more fluffy approach to the more strategic?
Yeah, look, realistically, there are going to be things that the staff look at and say, well, look, we don't agree with this, so the staff don't agree that, well, hey, we don't agree with, there's a particular approach that we're suggesting. I'm just trying to think of an example. So the recommendations that we made in the non-for-profit group, the staff, one of them was, well, the staff need to be trained up more in terms of the use of some technology. Now, if the staff say, well, we don't really agree with that, the management then would say, well, look, this is the reason that, you've suggested this is something that you want to do. Sure, it's going to take time for you to actually get up to speed with that. But, if this is something that's impeding you in your job, then we think it's important. So I guess the basis comes down to, well, how the management going to communicate what's required of people in terms of those sorts of changes and what's required of them. It's not all about, well, what's management going to do to solve all the problems here. It's very much about, well, what are we going to do that? The more fluffy approach to the strategic, well, I guess what I think there is the strategic stuff will take time. It's very difficult for any organisation to say, hey, we're going to make a strategic change overnight. It's trying to think about, well, within all of the recommendations that we might provide or within the information that you get from your focus group, you've got to take that back and say, well, there are some small wins here that might be easily implemented in terms of providing some extra assistance to people or providing them some training and development. But we've also got to step back and think of some of the bigger picture stuff here. How does it, what we're thinking about doing tie in with our strategic direction? So again, for the non-for-profit that I spoke about, what's their overall strategy in terms of continuing to grow the business so that they can ensure they provide services to people with disability? So they've got to think about the strategy, how they can do that, and yet maintain these people who are delivering the service for them. So yeah, absolutely, it's something that has to be considered. I don't have all the answers there.
Cool, great. Thanks, Tracy. Doesn't seem like we have any more questions here. But like I did mention just previously, we will send out the recording once that's uploaded and the slides. That will be from myself or Mark. So feel free to come back to us with any questions. If anything does come up as well, more than happy to provide that advice and insight as well. Thanks so much for your time, everyone. Really appreciate it. Hope your stomachs aren't grumbling as much as mine is as well. But really do hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll chat to you soon.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye.